Hi and welcome. You are listening to Listen and Relax. Sit back and enjoy Tinder horror stories. If you want us to continue making these videos, let us know in the comments what you think about the stories. Please like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell to stay updated when we post new exciting stories. These stories are all based on true stories. Thank you for listening. The Zoo Debacle, a Tinder Tale. Okay, so a few years back, I matched with this girl on Tinder. Let's call her Jessica. She seemed awesome. We had a lot in common, same sense of humor, similar taste in music. We chatted for a solid month, texting back and forth before we decided to meet up. She lived about an hour and a half away, so it took a bit of planning. The grand plan was for her to drive down to my city. We'd meet at the zoo. Classic first date, right? And then if things were going well, we'd head back to my place, maybe watch a movie, grab some takeout. I was actually kind of excited. I hadn't been on a date in ages, and Jessica seemed really cool. I got to the zoo a little early, grabbed a coffee, and waited near the entrance. I was a bit nervous, but mostly excited. Then Jessica showed up and, well, let's just say the spark wasn't there. At all. She looked different than her pictures, for one thing, and her personality, it just wasn't the same as in our texts. She was kind of awkward, didn't really say much, and her laugh sounded a bit forced. But I'm not the type to just bail on a date, so I plastered on a smile and we headed into the zoo. We walked around, looked at the animals, made small talk, but it was painful. I was trying so hard to find something to talk about, but it was like pulling teeth. The most exciting part of the date was when we went to the petting zoo and I got to feed the goats. I swear, I had more chemistry with those goats than with Jessica. After the zoo, I was seriously considering just calling it a day. But I felt bad. She'd driven all that way, and it just seemed rude to send her home after an hour. So, against my better judgment, I invited her back to my apartment. Big mistake. The awkwardness intensified tenfold. We sat on my couch, and it was like a competition to see who could be more uncomfortable. I put on a movie, but neither of us was really paying attention. I could feel her trying to get closer to me, subtly touching my arm, laughing a little too loudly at things that weren't funny. It was making my skin crawl. I was counting down the minutes until I could politely end the date. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, it was time. I walked her to her car, and as she was getting in, she leaned in and tried to kiss me. I swear I almost jumped back. I managed to turn my head at the last second, so she just kissed me on the cheek. I gave her a quick hug and practically ran back inside. A few minutes later, I got a text from her. "Why didn't you kiss me?" I groaned. I knew I had to be honest, but I also didn't want to be mean. I texted her back saying that I just didn't feel a romantic connection, but that I thought she was a cool person. She didn't reply, and I didn't hear from her again. Looking back, it's kind of funny. But at the time, it was seriously the most awkward experience of my life. It definitely taught me a lesson about the difference between online chemistry and real-life connection. And it made me realize that sometimes it's okay to just cut your losses and end a bad date early. The one-night stand nightmare. It was my sophomore year of college, and I was still getting used to the whole Tinder thing. I had matched with this girl, let's call her Ashley, who seemed really cool. We had a lot in common, and we texted for a few weeks before deciding to meet up. She was a few years older than me, which I thought was kind of hot. We went to a party at her apartment, and it was pretty chill. We just hung out, drank some beers, and talked. We seemed to click, and I was starting to think that maybe this could turn into something. After the party, we went back to my place. We were both pretty drunk, and one thing led to another. We ended up having sex, and it was actually pretty good. I used a condom, of course, and everything seemed normal. The next morning, I woke up and Ashley was gone. I didn't think much of it until I went to the bathroom and saw something that made my blood run cold. There in the trash can was the condom I had used the night before. But it wasn't tied off, and it was inside out. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I called Ashley, but she didn't answer. I texted her, but she didn't reply. I was freaking out. A few days later, I got a text from Ashley. She said she needed to talk to me. I was nervous, but I agreed to meet her. We met at a coffee shop, and she told me that she had been meaning to tell me something. She said that she had a sexually transmitted disease, and she thought she might have given it to me. I was in shock. I didn't know what to say. I was so scared and confused. I went to the doctor, and he confirmed that I had contracted the disease. I was devastated. I felt like my life was over. I never talked to Ashley again. I was so angry and hurt. I couldn't believe she had done this to me. It took me a long time to get over what happened. I had to go through a lot of therapy and treatment, but eventually I was able to move on with my life. I learned a valuable lesson from this experience. I learned that you can't trust anyone, even if they seem like they're cool. And I learned that you should always be careful when you're having sex. The mom's basement of horror. So I met this girl, let's call her Tiffany, on Tinder. She was a little older than me, maybe 3 years or so, which I thought was kind of cool. We chatted for a bit, and she seemed really down to earth and funny. The only thing was, she still lived with her mom. Which, whatever, people have their reasons. Anyway, we decided to meet up at her place. She said her mom was going to be out of town for the weekend, so it would just be us. I was a little nervous, but also kind of excited. I hadn't been on a date in a while, and Tiffany seemed really cool. I drove over to her house, and it was this typical suburban house, nothing too fancy. I rang the doorbell, and she answered, looking a little flustered. She said her mom had just left, like 5 minutes ago, and she was still kind of nervous about it. I told her not to worry, it would be fine. We went inside, and her house was, well, it was definitely her mom's house. Lots of doilies and floral patterns, that kind of thing. We went down to the basement, which was kind of dark and damp. She had a little makeshift living room down there, with a couch and a TV. We started watching a movie, but I could tell she was still on edge. She kept jumping at every little sound, and she kept looking out the window. I told her to relax, but she couldn't seem to shake it. Then, about an hour later, we heard the front door open. Tiffany's eyes went wide. "That's my mom," she whispered. "She's not supposed to be back yet." I panicked. I didn't know what to do. Tiffany told me to hide, and she shoved me into this tiny closet under the stairs. It was dark and cramped, and I could barely breathe. I sat there in the closet, listening to Tiffany and her mom talk. Her mom was asking who was over, and Tiffany was trying to play it cool, saying it was just a friend. But her mom wasn't buying it. She kept asking questions, and Tiffany was getting more and more flustered. I could hear them walking around the basement, and I was terrified they were going to find me. I was sweating like crazy, and my heart was pounding. I felt like I was in a horror movie. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard Tiffany's mom go upstairs. Tiffany opened the closet door, and I crawled out, feeling like a prisoner who had just been released. I was so relieved to be out of that closet, but I was also really embarrassed. I couldn't believe I had to hide in a closet from her mom. We didn't really talk about it. We just kind of laughed it off and tried to pretend like it didn't happen. But the mood was definitely killed. I stayed for another hour or so, but it was awkward. I could tell Tiffany was still on edge, and I just wanted to go home. When I finally left, I gave her a hug goodbye, and she apologized for the whole thing. I told her it was fine, but honestly, I was kind of traumatized. I mean, who has to hide in a closet from their date's mom? It was definitely one of the most awkward and embarrassing experiences of my life. I never went out with Tiffany again. I'm not sure if it was because of the closet incident, or if it was just because we weren't a good match. But either way, I learned my lesson. Never go to a girl's house when her mom might be home. It's just not worth the risk. The Milk Stout mission. It was a blind date, something I would never normally do. But I had traveled a lot for work and met strangers along the way, so I thought, why not? I arrived first at the restaurant because I didn't even know what he looked like. Risky, sure. But I've traveled a lot for work and met strangers along the way. My waiter remembered me from the last time and asked me what I was up to. He said I was on a blind date. He offered a code word and briefly discussed if anything was wrong, so he could help me. I was on a diet at the time and said that if I ever ordered a milk stout, I need help. The blind date arrived. He was already eccentric and talked with a surfer, stoned attitude. Our waiter asked for our order and gave me the "this is your date" look. The waiter asked if it would be together. I said separately, intending to pay for my own drink. The date said no together and pointed to my card and said you can put it on her. The waiter played it cool. The date started asking questions and revealed that we both have a psychology background. His was in behavioral psychology and dealt with people in the psychiatric clinic. My lips are tight. Mine is in business psychology. He asked me what I did. To be very vague, I work for the government/space. He asked me if I was an astronaut. No, not an astronaut. I changed the subject. He then asked me about my background. I really couldn't tell if he was joking or not. But he asked 1, what kind of Asian I was, 2, if I was shipped from a crate, 3, he didn't know there were other kinds of Asians. I asked if he was kidding. He got very serious and said no. For the next 15 minutes, I doubted whether I should take that milk stout. My waiter was constantly hanging around because he could hear the whole conversation. In fact, everyone around us could hear it. At one point, a couple turned around and looked at him, then at me. He told me he wanted another drink. I said, "Go ahead," and he replied, "Oh, you don't mind?" The 45-minute date was almost over. My date exclaimed, Dude, I totally forgot to ask your name." I put my hand on my face, literally a subtle face palm. I told him it was really late. It was only about 6:30 p.m. I asked for the check. My waiter came back with my date's drink, comped on the bill, and whispered as he walked by, "Don't worry, I got it handled." The silent hero we all need. I told my date that I had to return the signed check to my waiter. The date got up and started walking towards the door. I just casually started walking the other way. He waved me down and said I had to come here. I said, "Oh no, thank you." He texted me on the app since we didn't exchange numbers. "You're just rude. That's why you're like that." Well then, the tip jar trauma. Okay, so I'm on Tinder, right? And I match with this guy. Let's call him Chad. He seemed pretty cool in his profile, good pictures, interesting bio. We chatted for a bit, and he suggested we meet up for dinner at this new restaurant downtown. It was a place I'd been wanting to try, so I was like, sure, why not? I got to the restaurant a little early and grabbed a seat at the bar. It was a pretty busy place, lots of people, good atmosphere. I ordered a drink and waited for Chad to show up. He arrived about 15 minutes late, looking a little flustered. He apologized, saying he had trouble finding parking. No big deal, I thought. We all know how that goes. We sat down at our table, and things started off okay. We made small talk, talked about our jobs, our hobbies. But then as the night went on, I started noticing some things that were kind of off. First, he was really loud, like he was talking over everyone else in the restaurant, and he kept interrupting me when I was trying to say something. It was like he just wanted to hear himself talk. Then, when the food came, he started complaining about everything. His steak was overcooked, his potatoes were too salty, his wine wasn't the right temperature. He sent everything back to the kitchen, making a huge scene. I was so embarrassed. But the worst part was when the bill came. He grabbed it and started looking it over. Then he did something that made my blood run cold. He snapped his fingers at our waiter, like he was some kind of king. It was so rude. Our waiter came over, and Chad asked him a bunch of questions about the bill, even though it was pretty straightforward. Then he took out his pen and started writing on the tip line. I couldn't see what he was writing, but I had a bad feeling. When the waiter brought back the bill, I saw it. Chad had written 0 on the tip line. I was mortified. I couldn't believe he had done that. Our waiter was this young guy, maybe just out of high school. He was really nice and had been working his butt off all night, and Chad stiffed him. It was so disrespectful. I was so angry. I wanted to say something, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I just wanted to get out of there. We finished our drinks, and I thanked Chad for dinner, even though I was seething inside. We walked out of the restaurant, and I could tell he was expecting me to thank him again. But I just said goodnight and walked away. I was so upset. I couldn't believe how rude and inconsiderate he had been, and I felt terrible for the waiter. I wish I had said something, but I was just too shocked in the moment. I never went out with Chad again, obviously, And I learned a valuable lesson that night. Always pay attention to how someone treats service staff. It says a lot about their character. This whole experience was just a reminder that there are some truly awful people out there. And sometimes you have to learn these things the hard way. But at least I know now what kind of person I don't want to be with. The sandbox of despair. I was 19, swiping through Tinder, when I matched with this guy. He was a little older, seemed kinda cute, and we had some decent banter going back and forth. He suggested we grab brunch together at this trendy spot down by the beach, about a 45-minute drive from my place. I told my parents I was meeting up with some friends, the usual college kid cover story. So, the plan was to meet at his place first, then we'd head to brunch together. But when I got there, he told me he had to work in an hour, so we didn't have time for brunch. Weird, but okay. He invited me in for a quick coffee, which I thought was a little odd since we were supposed to be going out. But I went along with it anyway. As soon as I stepped inside, he grabbed me and tried to kiss me. I was totally caught off guard and pushed him away, saying no several times. I even made up some excuse about being on my period, which is never fun. He just looked at me, annoyed, and said, "Then why did you even come?" Like I was the one who had done something wrong. Then he grabbed his keys and said, "Well, I gotta go to work," and just walked out the door. I was so confused and embarrassed. I didn't know what to do. I just wanted to get out of there. But when I tried to leave, my car wouldn't move. I was parked in his driveway, which was half grass, half sand, and my tires were completely stuck. I kept trying to back out, but the wheels just spun, digging me deeper into the sand. One wheel was even lifted off the ground, like I was doing some kind of weird balancing act. I was panicking. I couldn't call my parents because they'd know I lied about where I was going. All my friends were either at work or out of town. The only person I could think of was my friend Sam. He was back home, really sick with cancer, but he was always there for me. I called him, feeling terrible for asking him for help, but he didn't hesitate. He showed up with his shaved head, looking pale and weak, but he was determined to get me out of there. It was the middle of summer, like 110 degrees, and we were both sweating like crazy. I felt so guilty, like I was going to kill my friend with my stupidity. After a lot of digging and pushing, we finally managed to get my car free. We left a huge hole in his driveway, and there was sand everywhere. It was a disaster. I was so relieved to be out of there, but I was also mortified about the mess we'd made. Luckily, the guy never said anything about it. But a few weeks later, he texted me asking if I wanted to come over now that I wasn't on my period anymore. I just ignored him. Looking back, it's kind of funny, but at the time, it was one of the most stressful and embarrassing experiences of my life. It just goes to show, you never really know what you're getting into with these Tinder dates. And sometimes you end up needing a friend with cancer to rescue you from a sandy driveway. The unbearable DJ. Okay, so Tinder. I'd been on a few dates, some good, some less so. This one was something else. His profile wasn't terrible. He described himself as a chill DJ, always vibing. Red flag number one, maybe? But all she wanted to talk about was what fancy restaurants we could go to and what kind of fun activities we could do. By which she meant expensive shopping sprees and fancy cocktails. It quickly became clear that she was more interested in a free meal and a tour guide than an actual date. I tried to steer the conversation towards getting to know each other, asking her about her interests and her life, but she just kept steering it back to her demands. She had a whole list of places she wanted to go, all of which were way out of my price range. Finally, after an hour of this, I just called it a night. I told her I had an early meeting the next day, which was a total lie, and left. She didn't even try to hide her disappointment. She just huffed and said, "Fine, whatever." The next day, I got a message from her calling me cheap and complaining about how I'd wasted her time. She even sent me a list of all the things she wanted to do that I'd missed out on. I just laughed and blocked her number. I guess you could say she ghosted me after trying to drain my wallet. It was a truly bizarre experience, and it definitely taught me to be more careful about who I meet online. So, There you have it. 2 Tinder dates from hell. One where I was the human volcano, and another where I was the target of a gold-digging ghost. Ah, the joys of online dating. You never know what you're going to get. The projectile puke incident. So picture this. I'm at my local bar having a few drinks with friends. It's a good night, the music's playing, the conversation's flowing, and I'm feeling, well, let's just say I was feeling pretty good. Maybe a little too good. In my slightly inebriated state, I get the brilliant idea to call up this girl I'd been seeing. We'd been on 2 dates already, and I thought things were going well. So I call her up, invite her to come meet me at the bar. Now, I'm a pretty big guy, so I can usually hold my liquor pretty well. But for some reason, this particular night, the combination of drinks and whatever else I'd consumed was not agreeing with me. She shows up, looking gorgeous as always, and gives me a hug. As soon as I get a whiff of her perfume, something floral, I can't quite place it. My stomach does a flip-flop. We go inside the bar, and I try to play it cool, pretending I don't notice anything. But that perfume, it was like a ticking time bomb in my nostrils. She orders some fancy cocktail, something with a little umbrella and a bunch of fruit, and I stick to water, realizing I'd reached my limit. We chat for a bit, and she's telling me about her day, but all I can think about is that perfume. It's getting stronger, and I can feel the nausea rising in my throat. Then she stands up, leans in close, and asks if I'm feeling okay. And that's when it happens. Everything I'd consumed over the past 2.5 hours decided to make a reappearance. Right there. Right then. All over her cute little black dress. It was like a scene from a movie, only way more embarrassing. I was mortified. Absolutely mortified. She, to her credit, was surprisingly chill about it. She went to the bathroom to try to clean her dress, while I sat there wanting to disappear into the floor. When she came back, she was laughing, saying it was just one of those things. We actually ended up dating for another 6 months after that, and we even joked about the projectile puke incident from time to time. She never wore that perfume again, though, and I apologized profusely for the rest of our relationship. The date from the depths of despair. So I'd been on Tinder for a while, mostly with mixed results. Some decent conversations, a few awkward meetups, but nothing really memorable. And then I matched with him. Let's call him Kevin, because, well, he just looked like a Kevin. His profile picture was a blurry selfie of him holding a fish, a sure sign of a complex personality, I thought sarcastically. But hey, I'm an optimist, or maybe just a glutton for punishment, so I swiped right. We chatted for a bit, and he seemed okay. A little bland, maybe, but not overtly creepy. So I agreed to go out for coffee. Daytime coffee dates are usually a safe bet, right? Wrong. So wrong. We met at this little cafe near my apartment. He was exactly as he appeared in his profile picture. Slightly fishy looking, with a vaguely damp air about him. He was wearing a t-shirt that looked like it hadn't been washed since the Bush administration, and he smelled faintly of, was it old gym socks? I couldn't quite place it. We sat down, and he immediately launched into a monologue about his passions. He was a self-proclaimed artist, which, as far as I could gather, meant he dabbled in various creative pursuits without actually excelling at any of them. He talked about his vision, his process, his deep and meaningful connection to, well, everything, really. Except, of course, for actually engaging in a two-sided conversation. I tried to interject a few times to ask him about his art, but he just talked over me, his voice growing louder and more intense with each passing minute. It was like being trapped in a room with a very enthusiastic, very smelly, and very boring motivational speaker. The coffee itself was mediocre, but at that point, it was the least of my problems. I was starting to feel a headache coming on, and I was desperately trying to find a polite way to escape this conversational black hole. Then, he started talking about his beliefs, and that's when things took a turn for the truly bizarre. He launched into a conspiracy theory about, I don't even remember what, aliens, lizard people, it was something along those lines. He was whispering conspiratorially, glancing around the cafe as if he expected government agents to burst in at any moment and whisk him away. I just stared at him, my mouth hanging open in disbelief. I honestly thought he was joking, but he wasn't. He was dead serious. At that point, I knew I had to get out of there. I made some excuse about needing to call my cat. Yes, my cat. And practically ran out of the cafe. I could feel his eyes on my back the entire time, like I was some kind of escaped lab rat he was determined to recapture. I never heard from him again, which frankly was a miracle. But the memory of that date, the damp t-shirt, the endless monologue, the whispered conspiracies, it's burned into my brain. It was a truly surreal experience, a glimpse into the mind of someone who was so far out there, he was practically in another galaxy. And it was, without a doubt, the worst date of my life. The vomit comet. Okay, so Tinder. It's a jungle out there, right? You swipe, you match, you chat, and sometimes you actually meet up with these people. This particular story involves one such meetup, a date that went so spectacularly wrong, it's become legendary among my friends. I had matched with this guy, let's call him Mark, because, well, he seemed like a Mark. His profile was pretty standard, some gym selfies, a picture of him with a dog, always a good sign, right? And a bio that said he was looking for someone fun and adventurous. I was feeling optimistic, so I swiped right. We chatted for a bit, and he seemed okay, not exactly my intellectual equal, but he was funny in a bro-ish kind of way, and he suggested we go out for drinks. I figured, why not? It was a Friday night, I had nothing else going on, and maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't be a complete disaster. We met at this bar downtown. It was a pretty popular spot, always packed on weekends. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at the bar, nursing a beer. He stood up when he saw me, gave me a hug, and then immediately ordered another beer, and then another, and another. It became clear pretty quickly that Mark was planning on getting very drunk. He was already slurring his words by the second round, and he was getting louder and more obnoxious with each passing minute. He started telling me these long, rambling stories about his life, interrupting himself constantly to order another drink. I tried to keep up with the conversation, but it was like trying to hold a conversation with a hurricane. He was just a whirlwind of drunken energy, bouncing from topic to topic, never actually listening to anything I had to say. After about an hour of this, I realized that Mark was in no state to be out in public. He was stumbling, he was slurring, he was starting to attract some unwanted attention from other patrons. I decided it was time to cut my losses and get him home. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, "why don't we grab a bite to eat? There's a diner down the street that has amazing milkshakes." He seemed enthusiastic about the idea, so we walked down to the diner. I ordered a milkshake for him, hoping that it would help sober him up a little bit. He chugged it down in about 2 seconds flat, and then he threw up. Everywhere. It was like a scene from a movie. He just projectile vomited all over the table, the floor, and even a little bit on me. I was completely grossed out, but I also felt kind of bad for him. He looked absolutely miserable. I helped him clean up as best we could, and then I got him into a cab and sent him home. I figured that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few minutes later, I got a text from him. "Hey," it said, "I had a really great time tonight. You're really cool. Want to come over?" I just stared at my phone in disbelief. "You're kidding, right?" I texted back. "You just threw up all over me." He texted back, "So? Everyone throws up sometimes. It's no big deal." I just shook my head and deleted his number. I never heard from him again, thank goodness. But that date, that was definitely one for the books. It was the most disgusting, most embarrassing, and most surreal experience I've ever had on a date. And it taught me a valuable lesson. Never go on a date with someone who's clearly planning on getting blackout drunk. It's just not worth the risk. The foot fetish fiasco, I'd matched with this guy on Tinder and he seemed okay. Not exactly Prince Charming, but his profile wasn't full of shirtless gym selfies or anything overtly creepy. We chatted for a few days and he seemed relatively normal, if a bit eager to please. He kept complimenting my pictures, saying I had a warm smile and kind eyes. A little generic, but hey, compliments are compliments, right? He suggested we meet up for a drink, and I agreed, figuring it couldn't hurt. A quick drink, a little chit-chat, and if things were weird, I could always plead a prior engagement with my Netflix queue. We met at a bar downtown. It was a weeknight, so it wasn't too crowded, which I appreciated. He was actually kind of cute in person, a little nervous, which I initially found endearing. He was a bit shorter than I expected, and his hair was a little enthusiastic, but overall not a deal breaker. We talked for a bit, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, asking me about my job, my hobbies, my family. So far, so good. Then, out of the blue, he says, "You seem a little tense. Let me give you a foot massage." Now, I'm not going to lie, I enjoy a good foot massage. My feet are perpetually sore from running around the city, and the idea of someone actually offering to rub them was tempting. So I thought, why not? We were sitting at a table, and he just scooted his chair over and started gently rubbing my feet. It actually felt pretty good at first. He was focusing on the arches, which were especially tight, and I started to relax a little. But then his hand started to wander. He started massaging higher and higher up my leg, past my ankles, past my calves, and towards my knee. It was a little more intimate than I was expecting. I started to get a little uncomfortable. I shifted in my seat, trying to subtly discourage his upward trajectory. He either didn't notice or chose to ignore my subtle cues. His hand continued its relentless climb, reaching my thigh. I thought, okay, this is getting weird. I cleared my throat and tried to subtly reposition my leg, but he persisted. His hand was now dangerously close to, well, let's just say it was getting into territory that was definitely not appropriate for a first date. I finally had to say something. "Actually," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and even, "I think that's enough." He looked up at me, a strange look in his eyes. "Why?" he asked, his voice suddenly different, lower, almost husky. "I thought you were enjoying it." "I was," I said, "but I think we should probably just stick to conversation." He didn't say anything for a moment, and then he reached for my hand. I pulled it back instinctively. He looked annoyed, and then he said, "I really want to connect with you." I knew what he meant, and I was definitely not interested. "I appreciate the offer," I said, "but I don't think we're on the same page." He scoffed. "What? You think you're too good for me?" I just shook my head. "I think it's time for you to leave," I said firmly. He glared at me for a moment, then stood up and stormed out of the bar. I sat there for a minute, trying to process what had just happened. It was definitely the creepiest and most uncomfortable date I'd ever been on. And it definitely taught me a valuable lesson. Foot massages on a first date are a very bad idea. The abortion confession, a date from the depths of discomfort. Okay, so online dating. It's a wild world, full of potential connections, and also, unfortunately, a lot of interesting characters. This particular story involves one such character, a date that was so mind-numbingly awkward, it's become a cautionary tale among my friends. I had matched with this girl on Tinder, and she seemed, well, let's just say she was attractive. Her profile picture was a glamorous selfie, and her bio was short and sweet, saying she was looking for fun. I was feeling optimistic, so I swiped right. We chatted for a bit, and she seemed, okay, a little flirty maybe, but not overly so. So I suggested we meet up for a drink. It was a Friday night, I had nothing else going on, and maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't be a complete disaster. We met at this bar downtown. It was a pretty popular spot, always packed on weekends. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at the bar, nursing a cocktail. She stood up when she saw me, gave me a hug, and then immediately ordered another cocktail. Things started off okay. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, our favorite music. She seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, and I was starting to think that maybe this wouldn't be a complete waste of time. But then, after a few drinks, she started to get a little loose-lipped. She started talking about her ex-boyfriend and how he had cheated on her. She was getting more and more animated as she told the story, and I could feel the awkwardness creeping in. Then, she dropped a bombshell. She told me that she had had an abortion a month ago. Now, I'm not going to lie, I was a little taken aback. It's not exactly the kind of thing you expect to hear on a first date. But hey, everyone has their own story, and I wasn't going to judge her for it. But then, she kept talking, and the more she talked, the more uncomfortable I became. She started talking about the details of the abortion and how she had felt afterwards. It was way too much information for a first date. And then she dropped another bombshell. She told me that she had lied to the guy who got her pregnant. She had told him that she wasn't going to get pregnant if he came inside her, because she wanted to see what it was like. I was completely speechless. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This girl was completely messed up. The Walmart walk of shame. Okay, so I'm on Tinder, right? Swiping through profiles, trying to find someone interesting. Someone who doesn't just post gym selfies and pictures of themselves holding a dead fish. And then I come across her profile. Let's just say she's a plus-size woman, which honestly I don't have a problem with. Everyone has their preferences, and mine is, well, let's just say I'm open to different body types. Her profile seemed cool, she was funny, she was smart, she had a lot of interests that I shared, so I swiped right. We matched, we chatted for a bit, and I suggested we meet up for a date. Now, I'm not a big fan of fancy restaurants or crowded bars. I prefer something a little more low-key. So I suggested we go for a walk, and not just any walk. I suggested we go for a walk around Walmart. I know it sounds weird, but hear me out. I'm a people watcher. I love going to Walmart and just observing all the different types of people who are there. It's like a zoo, but with more questionable fashion choices. And I thought it would be fun to go with a date. We could walk around, make fun of the weird stuff we saw, and just have a good laugh. She seemed a little hesitant at first, but I convinced her it would be fun. And honestly, the first part of the date was actually pretty good. We walked around Walmart, making jokes about the crazy stuff we saw, and we were having a good time. But then we walked past the kids' clothing section, and this little kid, maybe like 5 years old, comes up to her and says, "Are you about to have a baby?" I froze. I didn't know what to say. I felt terrible for her. I could see the hurt in her eyes. She just kind of laughed it off and said, "No, sweetie, I'm not." But I could tell she was embarrassed. We kept walking, but the mood had definitely shifted. The fun and laughter were gone. We were both just kind of quiet. I tried to make conversation, but she wasn't really interested. She was just staring straight ahead, looking angry and hurt. I felt like an idiot. I should have known that something like that could happen. I should have chosen a different date location. We finished our walk, and I drove her home in silence. When we got to her apartment, she just said goodbye and went inside. I didn't hear from her for a few weeks. Then, I got a series of angry emails from her telling me what an insensitive jerk I was and how I had ruined her day. I felt terrible. I knew I had messed up. I tried to apologize, but she wouldn't hear it. I learned a valuable lesson that day. Walmart is not a good place for a date. And sometimes, even the most well-intentioned date ideas can backfire spectacularly. The misogynist meltdown. So I'm on Tinder, right? Swiping through profiles, trying to find someone interesting. Someone who doesn't just post gym selfies and pictures of themselves holding a dead fish. And then I come across his profile. Let's just say he's attractive, which honestly is what caught my eye. His bio was short and sweet, saying he was looking for fun and adventure. I was feeling optimistic, so I swiped right. We matched, we chatted for a bit, and he seemed okay. A little flirty maybe, but not overly so. So I suggested we meet up for a drink. It was a Friday night. I had nothing else going on, and maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't be a complete disaster. We met at this bar downtown. It was a pretty popular spot, always packed on weekends. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at the bar, nursing a beer. He stood up when he saw me, gave me a hug, and then immediately ordered another beer. Things started off okay. We talked about our jobs, our hobbies, our favorite music. He seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, and I was starting to think that maybe this wouldn't be a complete waste of time. But then, after a few drinks, he started to get a little loose-lipped. He started talking about his ex-girlfriend and how she had cheated on him. He was getting more and more animated as he told the story, and I could feel the awkwardness creeping in. Then, he dropped a bombshell. He told me that he had had an abortion a month ago. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was a little taken aback. It's not exactly the kind of thing you expect to hear on a first date. But hey, everyone has their own story, and I wasn't gonna judge her for it. But then, she kept talking, and the more she talked, the more uncomfortable I became. She started talking about the details of the abortion and how she had felt afterwards. It was way too much information for a first date. And then she dropped another bombshell. She told me that she had lied to the guy who got her pregnant. She had told him that she wasn't going to get pregnant if he came inside her because she wanted to see what it was like. I was completely speechless. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This girl was completely messed up. I made some excuse about needing to use the restroom and I slipped out the back door of the bar. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I never heard from her again, which, thank goodness, was a miracle. But that date, that was definitely one for the books. It was the most awkward, most uncomfortable, and most disturbing experience I've ever had on a date. And it taught me a valuable lesson. Never go on a date with someone who's clearly not over their ex. It's just not worth the risk. The teetotaling terror. Okay, so online dating. It's a wild world full of potential connections and also, unfortunately, a lot of interesting characters. This particular story involves one such character, a date that was so mind-numbingly boring, it's become a cautionary tale among my friends. I had matched with this girl on Tinder, and we'd been chatting sporadically for a few weeks. By sporadically, I mean I'd send a message and she'd reply a few days later. But hey, I'm a patient guy, and she seemed interesting enough. She mentioned that she was a big fan of tea, and when she texted me suggesting we go on a date to a tea shop, I thought, why not? I'm not a huge tea person myself, but I'm always open to trying new things. So, we agreed to meet at this tea shop that was about an hour's drive from my place. It was only a 5-minute walk from her place, which I thought was a little strange, but I didn't think too much of it. I drove out to the tea shop, parked my car, and met her inside. She was exactly as she appeared in her pictures, cute, petite, and a little bit shy. We ordered our tea and sat down at a table, and then nothing. I tried to make conversation, asking her about her job, her hobbies, her family, but she just gave me one-word answers and stared at me blankly. It was like trying to talk to a brick wall. I asked her about her favorite tea, and she just shrugged and said, "I like tea." I asked her about her favorite book, and she just shrugged and said, "I like books." I asked her about her favorite movie, and she just shrugged and said, "I like movies." It was like pulling teeth. I was trying so hard to make conversation, but she just wasn't having it. After about 35 minutes of this awkward silence, I suggested we go somewhere else. Maybe we could go for a walk or grab some ice cream. But she just shook her head and said, "I'm tired." I was a little taken aback. We had literally just been sitting at a table for 35 minutes. How could she be tired? But I didn't push it. I just said, "Okay, no worries. Have a good night." We said goodbye, and I drove back home, feeling completely confused and rejected. And then, when I got home, I saw that she had unmatched me on Tinder. I was completely baffled. I didn't think I had done anything wrong. I had just been trying to make conversation. I guess some people just aren't meant for small talk. Or maybe she was just really tired. Or maybe she just didn't like me. Whatever the reason, it was definitely one of the most awkward and disappointing dates I've ever been on. And it taught me a valuable lesson. If someone doesn't seem interested in talking to you, don't force it. Just move on. Thank you for listening to these stories. Hopefully you enjoyed them. Please like and subscribe if you want to hear more exciting stories.